everybody, it's Ashley Christina back as your Plutonic Astrologer, and this is my video on who I am so that you can know who you're talking to. So for the ones that speak astrology, this is great for you. For the ones that don't, I will describe my energy as I know it via my astrology chart and why I am very Scorpionic, Plutonic, and one-on-one in relationships, working with people in astrology and healing. So I have a rising sign of 16 degrees of Pisces. My inner self, so that's your Amin Kali or your Nadi, is at 24 degrees of Gemini. My Scorpio sun sits at 5 degrees of Scorpio at the very end of house 7, conjunct in a tight conjunction to Pluto, which sits at 2 degrees of Scorpio. I have my Mercury at 17 degrees of Scorpio in house 8, and my Saturn at 17 degrees of Scorpio in house 8. My South Node sits at 27 degrees of Scorpio in house 8. My North Node sits at 27 degrees of Taurus. So a lot of my path has been learning to come into myself, and I'm very aware that that is my direction, because that's what your North Node is. However, I can still work with people because my Chiron, which is retrograde, sitting at 7 degrees of Gemini, tells me that I have a lot of wisdom that I don't speak to people. And so these are the videos that, for me, being so Scorpionic, is really hard for me to put out. I am behind the scenes. If I could all do it on type, I would, but it just doesn't work that way. My Venus is in Sagittarius, sitting at 10 degrees of Sagittarius in house 9, because I have a Pisces rising, so all my houses are quite fairly aligned with the celestial, how it should be. Like imperfectly, that really only happens when you have a Pisces rising, sometimes at the very start of an Aries rising. Uranus, for me, my natal chart sits at 11 degrees of Sagittarius, so they're very, very on top of each other. I have gained so much knowledge in my lifetime. For being 34 years old, I have studied yoga and practiced yoga at levels that you don't see typically here in North America. I've understood and studied the Vedic texts, the Upanishads, the Puranic texts. I've studied and speak levels, and I'm totally not perfect yet, of Sanskrit. I sing mantras. I've finished 2 university degrees. I graduated from naturopathic medicine school here in Canada. There's only 2 of them. I've written my clinical exams. I'm not legally allowed to use the title of what I am until I take out my, clinical. I can practice with public, which just means me paying $1,000 and paying an extra $1,000 in insurance. But I'm not there yet because I don't want to just work one-on-one in naturopathic medicine quite yet. I'm so in love with astrology, and I want to travel this world. I love studying. I love culture. I love different methods and ways of thinking. I've learned so much from the Vedic texts, and I do speak the language of Western astrology, but I'm just starting to get into Vedic astrology because that's where it's really, really, really at. And by no means is Western astrology a waste. It has been my saving grace in my life of trying to understand what my experience is, because I feel everything. So I'll keep describing myself because, yes, I'm so much water. And I do have a moon in Capricorn. It sits at 4 degrees of Capricorn, and it's tightly conjunct Neptune in Sagittarius, at the very end of Sagittarius, 29 degrees of Sagittarius. So that's similar to having like a Pisces moon. And it's also tightly conjunct Jupiter, which sits at 8 degrees of Capricorn. And then I've got my Mars, so that's my work ethic, at 16 degrees of Capricorn. Like I have spent my entire life studying. And I learn so much all the time. I love learning. Like, I love it. But I'm at the point where I'm like, okay, you have so much knowledge, start sharing it, because that is, in astrology, where the light comes through, is when you recognize what your wound is, which is the Chiron, and it's the fact that I don't speak what I know. Like, I don't speak. I don't go out and say the things. And that's where I'm gifted. And so slowly I've started to read people's charts, and I've had nothing but positive feedback, and I love it, and I don't want to do it to a point where it's too much for me, like maybe one chart every once in a while, maybe 2 charts every once in a while. It's a means of income for me, and for sharing the hours and hours and hours and hours and years I've spent doing this. In a way that is helpful to other people, but it's also from like genuineness of loving this and believing in it so much. I talk about astrology so much because it is a language. Once you start to speak it, you can't just go back to speaking English. It's for the apes. English is for the apes, okay? It's so basic. It's keeping you from so much by only speaking the English language. So that's just a very basic introduction to myself, only for the people that know how to speak astrology. For the ones that don't, basically a Scorpio, and my level of Scorpio energy sitting at the very end of house 7 and house 8 is I see and I sense and I pick out. I read energy like nobody's business. I see through people like nobody's business. I can sense to the point of like I can talk to somebody, and if they don't know which like their bloodlines are, I can sense what their bloodlines are. I can sense their pain. I can sense where their mind is blocking them. And, you know, a lot of these very, 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 very intuitive things, people want evidence behind. So for me, reading astrology kind of goes, okay, I can show you this in astrology because I speak the language of astrology, and I can talk to you about it. And so I basically have a path, especially with the Pisces rising and so much Scorpio, of like traveling through life, very much picking up all the subtleties of life. It's a very difficult path for me. I'm a healer. People come and tell me horrible things. I'm the empath. People can pick it out. I'm the one that, you know, people that have never been able to say some things come and tell me, and I've had that my whole life, and it's been hard for me to understand why me, because why are people coming and telling me these horrible things? I've never had these experiences, but in me being so empathic, I have, in a way, secondhand had an exorbitant amount of experience in this life already, and I'm still so young, and worked with people in some of the darker places, like sexual abuse, suicide, death, and that has been my path. I call my family the death shamans. I kind of joke about it, but, you know, in a lovely way. In North America, we don't have the institutions that really talk about death. You know, religion has really fallen by the wayside in a lot of ways here. Culture has as well, old teachings have. And so, for example, my mother's mother, so my grandmother on my mother's side, when she came to Canada from Latvia, she started an old age home taking care of the elderly before they pass. So my first experiences in life are of death, really, taking care of and kind of having all these old, kind of like grandparents, like pseudo grandparents, and then also having the experience of them dying and realizing, a very different point of view than the average person growing up in North American society, Canadian society. My father has had exorbitant, his stories are quite, he's been first, just the way his path has taken him first on hand at some like major accidents, and been right there as several people have died and passed over. So, some of my earliest experiences are the stuff that we don't talk about in the society, such as ghosts and spirits in the house, and having different shamans coming to my house and teaching me from a very young age how to remove spirits and deal with the afterlife and the death process. And so that is a very scorpionic path, very Plutonic. I've debated if I'm supposed to, go into some level of shamanism or what, but astrology, in the way that I've learned it and the way that I can look into a chart, is kind of shamanic. It's Plutonic. It's these subtle energies, and once you even start to study the asteroids and the harmonic charts, you can really see people's energy and understand like their paths. So when there's any confusion, instead of thinking, oh, what's my purpose, or why do people treat me this way? You can look into astrology chart and find asteroids or different like energies, the way the astrology chart is created. And then once you kind of like see it and kind of can explain it and be like, okay, so that's not just me, that's like some aspect of me that people pick up and either they don't like or whatever my painful experience is, when you can kind of see it in a chart and be like, okay, it's written here. And I can tell you these things without even having to hear your story. And typically I'll read somebody's astrology chart and then they start talking about whatever energy it coincides with. And I'm like, okay, that makes sense. So it's kind of like a little bit of like, psychology in a way. And an understanding of self is very important, because once you understand self, you're not so lost in this, especially in North America, where people have in a large way lost their identity. So I really, really, really love helping with that, and I love supporting people to find, who they are and what their belief system is, and find out their stories and their histories and what makes them them, because we're all energetic beings. You could be all Taurus and Virgo energy, for example, and maybe you don't feel things to the extent that somebody that is super watery does, but we are all energetic beings on this planet, and there's so many subtle energies at play, and we just haven't been talked to about these. We haven't been taught them, and that's where astrology is navigating something that is very old, but for us, it's very new here. And it's fascinating. I love it. And so basically, me in a nutshell is I work one-on-one with people. I can go very in-depth into their being to show them, tell them, explain their energies to them. And I use a platform of astrology for it. It's not just me taking an intuitive approach, because I'm not going to cross those boundaries, because that is just too vulnerable. People don't like those areas that are, oh, you might be wrong. So I use astrology and explain their chart to them and explain how that comes about, and that's how it works.